To our 13.0 office hours. Thank you all for joining. Here in a minute, we will have Johnny go over edits that have been made in 13.0. Any specific questions, like Dan said in the chat, feel free to put them in the chat. You should also all have the ability to unmute. So if you'd rather chat or say something out loud, don't hesitate to interrupt us. We really want this to be more of like an interactive, if things pop up, if you've seen specific issues, if something is working well for you, again, don't hesitate to just unmute yourself or throw it in the chat. Dan is monitoring chat, so we'll be letting us know if something occurs and we miss it. For our agenda today, Johnny will be reviewing changes that have been included in the 13.0 release. We'll be doing a high-level review and look over of the generate documentation. We will also be discussing and reviewing the release calendar. As you all know, if you've been a part of these conversations, we also do a survey that we include a QR code here at the end, and Dan will actually be putting the link for the survey in the chat towards the end of the meeting. We do use this information to tweak these sessions. We've actually, over the last, I don't know how long we've been doing this, at least a year and a half, have made several alterations to these meetings because of the survey. So it only usually takes about a minute or two. It's super helpful to us. Like I said, we do use the information to make any edits or tweaks. So it would be great if you could just take a second and get it, the survey filled out. We appreciate it. We have here open discussion at the end of the agenda, but like I said, if you have a specific question or a comment or anything, don't hesitate to throw it in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm going to kick it over to Johnny.
Yes, unfortunate picture, but so we'll be going over the 13.0 release with any of the changes that we've incorporated for 13. Most of these are going to be like broader generate, as opposed to most of our releases are specifically targeted at a set of files. The numbered release that we roll over in the late summer, doesn't specifically target any files, so this is a broader range of changes across the application. But we'll go through those, and like Liz said, if you have any questions along the way, ask, and I'll do my best. So specifically for IDEA reports for 009, this one for the EdFacts coordinators are on. I guess you'll understand the complexity of exiting and how much fun that is. There's some verbiage in the file specification itself that talks about the students that should be included and shouldn't, and more specifically in the move known to be continuing category. So we went through the file specification. We did a detailed dive into that, the file specification, the logic that we were using, and made sure that all of that stuff aligned. So that was really the only IDEA file change that we had. And I don't even know if that, I'm trying to think, I don't even think that resulted in any file changes. It was more of a validate that we are doing everything correctly based on all of those various rules in that specific file specification. So limited set of IDEA changes. And then for the non-IDEA changes, so there was a little confusion on this, and I'm glad Emily brought this up. So file 163 is the gun-free status reporting for the LEA and school level. That's actually a discipline file, but the reason it's marked here as directory, because I don't want to cause any confusion, is because that is a report that reports on the organization. For us, it runs through the directory fact type. So I just wanted to, just in case there's any confusion there, that does report on discipline data, but it's discipline data reported at the organization level. So for generate, it runs through the directory fact type. So anyway, we did have an issue where the actual gun-free status value wasn't coming through at the LEA level, and resolved that. So that one should be good. And then neglected or delinquent, we didn't have support for those previously because the dimension for neglected or delinquent we were working with CEDS and the community to figure out, like, okay, that dimension wasn't correct, first off. And then the things that were in the dimension, if you fully populated that dimension, it was a very, very large set of records that was causing like performance issues and generate. So we were looking at that like, okay, can we rework that dimension in a way that makes sense? Also, obviously, that it supports all of the files that it's supposed to support. We did that work in 13. So we redefined that dimension. A couple of columns we pulled out because they are CTE specific. So they're going to be in a different dimension. We added one additional column in there that was needed to support some of these files. And then once we got that dimension in, then we actually refined the migration logic for neglected or delinquent. So we now have support for that set of files, 119, 127, excuse me, and then 218, 219, 20, and 21, the newer ones. These are now, I would say, available for pilot, right? We were able to migrate data through, and so now we have some support for the neglected or delinquent files if any state is looking at potentially piloting any of those files. And that's it for the non-IDEA report specific changes. User interface was a bigger set of changes this go around, so we're going to go through a little bit of that. The first thing, and I don't know because I can't see everybody on the list. I don't know if anyone from Maine is on, but we do want to call Maine out and appreciate them for the work they did. So they were doing a certification effort of the Generate application for their environment, and part of what they did was run an accessibility test. And the tool they used found some issues in Generate, and they reported those to us. So we created a set of accessibility tickets on our side, and we are currently working through those. We got quite a few done for 13. We still have a few that we're working on, and those are in the pipeline, so those will be coming as well. But I tried to put a couple examples up here because if it's not something, if you don't work with Generate every day, these are things you might not even notice potentially. But like in the first upper left, you can see like more contrast between the lettering for data migration and the background color so that it's easier to see when you've highlighted that option. Also, when you mouse over it, it doesn't show in the screenshot because when you're screen grabbing, it removes the mouse. It also highlights the outside of the box to make it more obvious which option is selected. And then if you go to the bottom, this one's a little harder to see. It's probably better. It's a little more visible in the one above, but the like header bar is a little darker because that met the contrast ratio that's required between the lettering and the background color. Because you can see in the 12.4 version that I'm going to say blue, that blue color is a little lighter. So the contrast between the lettering wasn't enough. So we changed that color to meet the contrast. And then probably a more obvious one is this, what I got up there is toggle. Couple of changes here. You can see more spacing between the options, makes it easier to see the letters aren't as close. Change the color of the box of the little circles, the option circles, because they blended into the lettering too easily. It also made it a little more difficult to see which one was selected because of the coloring. So those now are the more gold color. And then the on off. So the yes option stays the blue color because that there is enough contrast there. But the no, instead of being white and gray, we put the gold color so you can see the sliders for the options. So there are things like that. These are just examples. There are other things you're going to see as you're going through Generate if you are familiar enough with the previous version. There's also some things in the background that aren't going to be as easy to see. We also address like the tabbing order. So if you have to do everything by keyboard and you don't use a mouse, the tabbing order so that you can actually tab through the options on a page or tab through the elements on a page to get to the thing you want. And the interaction once you get to the element that you want, like if you need to push space button or enter or something to mirror a click. So we also worked on a lot of the tabbing. Like I said, there's more issues, or there's some more accessibility stuff we've got in the pipeline, so you'll see some more in the next couple versions as well. And then the next one, I'm actually going to demo, but I'm going to steal the share really quick. Hope I didn't get logged out. Okay. So this is 13. So you'll see some of the things we just talked about. But so really quickly, for those of you who, depending on your level, like what you do with Generate, your interaction with the actual application, a little context. So the thing that I'm about to show you makes some sense. Several versions ago, I think probably maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, we added what we call debug tables. So basically what they are is when you're running a migration, the last step in the migration takes the data out of the fact and dimension tables and puts that data into the report table. When that happens, what actually gets written into the report table is the aggregated count. Right at that point, we lose student granularity. Now you just have a count of students that meet, whatever the category set criteria are. And in order to help with like debugging or validation or matching efforts when you're working on file specifications, one qualifier, these obviously only apply to student level files. So what I'm talking about has nothing to do with anything at the organization level. But so any of the student level files, we built it into the migration itself. So there's nothing you have to do. When the migration runs, that very last step in the background, when it's accumulating the students to then count them to write them into the report table, we take that set of students and write them out to a table. So that way, if you need to know who makes up a count, you could always go to that table in the back end through SQL, and you could query that table and you'd get the set of students with their criteria for that particular category set. And then you had the ability to do, all sorts of sorting and things like that you wanted to do, because you could query on all of the students in a school or all the students in a specific, like say disability code or something like that. Or you could really narrow down and say all of the students in this school that have, this race, this sex, this disability code, and get down to a very specific subset. But that we built that a while ago in the back end, and we've been building the infrastructure to do what we're releasing in 13. So with that context in mind, if you go to, I'm going to use 007 because it has an example in it that I want to show you as well. So if I have migrated my data, right? So for this is 007, for those of you that aren't aware, this is a discipline file. The reasons for a unilateral removal. I'm going to go to the LEA level because this is easier, the counts are easier. So you get this sort of display in the UI, right? Which is basically, here's an LEA with their information, here's the interim removal reasons, and then the disability across the top, so you can see the counts of students that meet these, that meet that specific criteria. So now if I click on the 11, I get the students that make up that count of 11. And you can see it in the UI. So this is actually presenting in the UI that information that you previously could only get from the back end by querying a SQL table. This will hopefully help, again, validation, like for FAQs coordinators that might just come in to Generate to pull a submission file or to do some validation work, things like that aren't necessarily running migrations or to that level within Generate. We're hoping this is helpful. And then so with this is the thing I wanted to point out. There's a little bit of a difference, so I want to make sure everybody's aware with what the debug tables were doing and what the report table was showing. So the debug tables were basically taking every student, so a unique set of students, and then just writing them out into that table, right? Where the report was aggregating all of the students that met whatever the criteria was for that specific report. So we added an additional column here called count for some of these. You'll see it in all of the student details. Sorry, we're calling this student details. So if you hear a reference to student details, if you see that in the release notes, this is what we're talking about, is the student details from a student report page in the UI. But you're going to see this count column in all of them. In some of the reports, it's going to be a 1, and what it 1 for every student. Because basically what that means, if that specific report is a unique set of students, right? So the student is not reported more than one time, then what you're going to see is a count of 1 for every student. So you'll see all the students that are in that count, they'll all have a count of 1. For 007, and that's the reason I use this one as an example, for 007, it's a count of removals, right? Not individual students. So I wanted to point that out just in case there's some confusion when you start using this. So remember, this was a count of 11, right? So there's my count of 11, but I only actually have 10 students here. That's because this particular student had 2 removals that qualified in this reporting period. So the 10 students with this student being counted twice makes up the 11. So I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out in case you, because if you go to pull it, you'll see up here it says 1 of 10 of 10. And, there's an obvious mismatch there between the 10 and the 11. So that's how the 11 works. And it all depends on the file specification, what the file specification is counting versus the debug table when it's writing those records out for you to evaluate later. There is an export feature. So for that, here. You can export that data. So it basically just takes everything that's on screen and drops it into Excel. So you can get that set of students with the criteria. So you have that for evaluation if you need to pull it out, to do some matching against legacy numbers, internal processes, something else that you might have. So this is the student details. The other piece to be aware of is because of, I think it was in 12.4 or 12.3, I can't remember, and I should, it was like 1 or 2 versions ago. We removed the C, that C that prefaced or all of the report codes in the generate logic, and everything we displayed. We had like C002, C005. That had been a request for quite a while to remove that because that wasn't really valid. And we were able to do that a release or 2 ago. But because of that change in the logic, this will work for anything that you're going to migrate going forward, right? So this is, as you migrate anything, once you've installed 13, it's going to create the debug table. And when you go to this page, you'll be able to pull up the student details on any of these counts. The other thing that we are working on, there was one piece that we ran into a little bit of an issue with that we're still working on. So we're going to try to release that as soon as we can get it resolved, which hopefully is going to be 13.1 or the next version. Is if you go to the total, sorry, this one doesn't have it. If it's a report that has a total count, the export feature wasn't working for the total. So just so you're aware, if you happen to go to the total and try to export that list from there, there was an issue with that, but we're still working on that one. I think that's it for student details. So that's a big one. We've been trying to do that one for quite a while. And we've been laying those infrastructure pieces. So it's really nice to be able to get that one in and make that available. I'm going to stop sharing, which I think, yeah, we can get back to the presentation. So that's the other piece that we did. So this is the student details is the screenshot. The other piece was the when you go to the report page, so not student details, but the actual report page itself, there was an issue with the paging. So like if it had more than 1 page of results, depending on the report, which most of them do, there was a problem with the way it was reordering the LEAs and the schools that it was showing, because it starts out in alphabetical order, or it started out in alphabetical order, but then when you hit the next page, it wasn't keeping that order. So there was a problem with that paging that was resolved in 13.0 as well. So the paging will maintain that order, and you can, work through all the pages that way. And what you're expecting to see in order will still be in that same order. I think that's it for the UI changes. And then so general changes, these are just things that we did in the background. So I put the UI one in here. We already talked about that one, but again, thank you to Maine for the work they did in helping us identify that stuff, and we were able to get those accessibility changes in. For migrations, this is a big one, so I want to make sure everybody's aware of this. This is another one of those kind of big ones. This is more in the background, but I want to make sure I talk about it. There's not a great way to demo this one, but one of the things we had talked about again, so for the people that do the migrations, this is probably very familiar to you. If you're not involved in like the migration of data through Generate, just a quick bit of context so that you'll understand this change. The way Generate worked prior to 13 was when you ran a migration for any file, doesn't matter, we'll just take 002. So if you're running your child count data, it would migrate the counts into the report table. And so if you went to query the table, you would have every record in there that had a count. And then when you went to the report page and you went to create the submission file and you actually click the button, create submission file, in the background, what it was doing was pulling the report data, but then also running some additional logic to determine which zero count records needed to be created, needed to be added to the submission file. So they were sort of created on the fly when you created a submission file or when you asked for a submission file. The issue with that, and I'm going to give you pros and cons so that you understand the trade-offs we were looking at here, but the difficult part for the folks that work with the migration, me included, was troubleshooting that, right? Because you had to create it, you had to create a submission file to get it to run that logic if you were trying to do something from the front end. From the back end, that meant that zero count logic was separated from the report logic. So I might be trying to validate all of my numbers, and I had to run two different sets of logic in order to get the full set of data that I need to do a comparison for. And we've been looking at that, that trade-off for a while. And we determined, especially with a lot of input from all of you, which we really appreciate, that you would prefer to have the zero counts more readily available, easier to troubleshoot. So what we ended up doing is now when you run a migration with 13, when you run a migration, it's going to put the counts into the report table, but it's also going to run the zero count logic and put the zero counts into the report table. So now you'll have both sets of counts when you run a migration. There's no more creating it on the fly or having to do an extra step to see the zero counts. But I want to make everybody aware there is a little bit of a trade-off with that. So I figured Sean would like that one. But there is a little bit of a trade-off. So I want to make sure everybody's aware, right? Because we're writing more rows into the table now, because we're writing all these zero count rows, there is there's going to be a slight delay potentially in pulling that report data into the UI, because now the UI, where maybe it was pulling 100 rows, now maybe it's pulling 125 rows. And I mean, realistically, 125 is nothing. But if we're talking about really large sets of rows, right now it has to pull more data. So that means you may see a slight delay in like the UI, or transitioning when you're at the SEA level and you transition to the LEA level, or LEA to school specifically, because usually schools can obviously have more records. There may be a slight delay. We're working on any efficiencies we can do in the back end for that. It's not significant, not that we saw, but just so you're aware, you may see a slight, delay from what you were used to. The flip side of that, which is a positive, another positive, is the submission files should also run a little faster now, because instead of it having to do two separate processes, all the submission file process is going to do is just grab the data that's in the report table and present it based on the metadata for that submission file, right? So now it doesn't have to run that additional process, that additional logic in the background. So the UI might be a little slower potentially on really large data sets, but the submission file should be faster as well. So there's a little bit of a trade-off, but the zero counts are now available. You can query them in the report table, which I think that's going to be considerably easier for those of us that have to do validation work against the zero counts. Utilities, this was a quick one, and unfortunately this one is entirely on me. When we were doing the removal of the C logic, I missed the fact that the create snapshot utility had a reference in it to the C code, or to the C at the beginning of the report code. So that has now been updated in 13. So that's been addressed. The create snapshot utility will work. There is some code when you download 13, just so you're aware for the folks that use this, that actually will go into your existing snapshot tables and remove the C from that column, from the report column in your existing tables, so that they will be aligned if you need to, for whatever reason, go back and look at a previous table that you've created or whatever. But that one we had to fix because I missed that in 12.4. And then the ETL documentation templates, as always, like if we had to make any structural changes, we reflected those in the ETL docs, so that they're up to date with anything that we had to modify for 13. I think that's it for the general changes. Documentation. We have a documentation team, which I want to call them out there doing tremendous work in the background. And I hope you guys are seeing that. If you're able to go out to the Get Book Generate documentation site, they're doing really good work out there, and they're converting as much stuff as they can. And they're taking all the documentation we have and even actually, beefing that up and adding more context and things to it. But we've got additional fact type pages that are going to come in because, I think we introduced the first set of those a couple of releases ago, and it was obviously we focused on the special education ones. So we focused on, child count, discipline, exiting, assessments, I think was the 4, and then directory as well. But there's all the other fact types in Generate that do all the non-special education. So they're working on those, and there are new fact type pages available. These aren't specifically tied to a release. So they are going to be able to, like, if they're not out there today, they may come tomorrow, the next day, something like that, right? It's not like they do a whole bunch for 13 and then you don't get anything until the next version comes out. But just so you're aware, they're working on fact type pages, adding additional context to existing documentation. They're doing incredible work, that team. We added a document for, this is one of those, again, if you do ETL work, the report migration itself, because it uses a lot of dynamic SQL, it's harder to debug. There is a process for it, but it's a manual process. And so we added some documentation out there for the, for the folks I know on here. They know how to do that. But like if you get somebody that's, helping out, or you get somebody new or additional people working on the Generate project, there's documentation out there now how to do that report validation work. And then, like I said, the analysis of the Generate store procedures, they were going through all of that documentation, trying to fill gaps, making that documentation more complete, trying to identify places where we needed to add documentation. So they've been doing really good work. And of course, they're also going to have the 13.0 release notes available. I think the only other for me is Discord. This is just a reminder that we do have the Discord channel out there. It's a place you can come in and we can have discussions. You can post anything, questions, issues you run into, questions about how, another state might be addressing something in a file specification, whatever. If the discussion, like we have channels that, like we have the general community support channel, which is the one we have a picture of. But we can also create like side channel, basically, like if a discussion needs to have its own thread, we can do that. The Generate team also tries to monitor this as well, so we're involved in those conversations. But this is a place where you all can communicate with each other, and all of us combined can, get together, discuss things, talk about issues, work on problems, whatever it is we need to do. If you need to, it says on there, reach out to your TA provider. In the generate application, there's an email link. I think a generic one for generate help. So if you're not sure who to reach out to, you could send something to that. It'll end up getting to the right person. And basically, we will send you an invitation to join the Discord channel. So if you want to and you haven't already. Oh, one other thing really quick. If there are some IT departments in states that don't allow Discord, if your state is one of those, we do have a letter that we can provide you that explains why we'd like to have an exception. So if you need that, if you'd like to join Discord, but there's some limitation, we can also provide that and hopefully help you with your IT department or your security folks. I think that's it for me.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Johnny.
Sure.
Any questions for Johnny? Okay. Okay, so quickly, so if CIID funding continues past 10/1 of this year, what our plan is to release, like Johnny said a minute ago, 13.1 in that October timeframe, for focusing in on those files due in January. So as most of you know, what we try and do is we try and do a release about 6-ish weeks in advance of the submission window opening up. So we will still continue working towards that goal. As you know, CIID 3 is released, and anything changes there, we will keep you all posted. If those timelines change at all, obviously that will be updated as well. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, this is currently on the Gitbook documentation site that Dan put in the chat a minute ago, so you can go and be looking for updates there. That is our plan moving forward. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. So as I said in the beginning of the call, this is the QR code for the evaluation survey. It's like I said and mentioned, a few minutes ago, it is really critical and helpful to our processes moving forward. So if you could just take a few minutes to fill it out, we do greatly appreciate it. And like I said, we really do use the information and try and implement into these sessions to make them helpful. That is it for today. That's everything we had on our agenda. We're happy to stick around and answer any questions or chat through anything if any of you have anything. And if not, then don't hesitate to reach out and we will talk to you soon. Thank you all.
The student list in the UI that you were showing us.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to export? So it looks like when you click on each category, you could download that list of students. Is there an export function to download all of them? Or do you have to do
all
it
in
by
one category, or you mean the full set itself?
Either the full, maybe the full set by district or by organization, LEA.
We do not currently have one where you could say, I want to get the full set of numbers. Oh, sorry, I shared screen again. I hope. Are you seeing my screen?
I can see it,
okay.
Yes.
Hopefully I'm sharing screen. If you want to, and just so everybody's aware too, these are all made up information, so I don't want anybody to be concerned. This is our test data, so this is all made up. But we do not currently have a way to say, you just wanted to get all of the data for this one district. We don't have that, but we do have on the report page, we have export to Excel where you can export this entire set of data. So you can get this entire set of data, or you can get an individual count from the student details, but we don't have in between that, if that's what you were asking. We don't currently have that. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's would be used. I was just curious.
And yeah, that might be something we could do if you have an opportunity to fill out the survey. I think there's an opportunity to add some not just answer questions, but open text boxes. If that's something, you think you want to throw in there, that's something we could consider. But yeah, We don't currently have a way to do that. You'd have to export the full thing and then just, narrow down to the district you wanted to look at or something like that.
Right. And that,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, thank you. So
Yes.
that I got in there to make sure I was understanding that the export to Excel that you mentioned, because that one is just sort of an Excel version of what's showing in that grid on the page, but it doesn't
Yes.
have the SSIDs like when you click on
Oh, yes.
that.
So yeah, I apologize. I'm sorry. Yes, it does not, because
Okay.
that's not going to the student, or sorry, that's not going to those debug tables in the background.
Right.
That is an interesting idea.
Because
I'm
I'm just thinking
wondering,
for users that aren't familiar with SQL, something equivalent to the debug tables, but in the UI. Was my
that
thought.
is a very interesting idea that I had not thought of. Because the debug tables, the way we designed those when we built those, like I said, whatever that was, maybe a year or so ago, a little more than a year ago, basically what they were doing is they were building one for every category set that report had.
Mhm.
So like if you take 002, which is the one I am most familiar with, there are 13 category sets at 3 levels, right? So the SEA, the LEA, and the school, there's 13 category sets at each level. So there's 39 total category sets.
Mm-hmm.
When you run the migration, it creates 39 tables. It creates category set A at the SEA level, category set B at the SEA level, and so on. But
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't go into any more detail, right? So that is going to have all of the, let's say you pulled the LEA. When you go to that table, the debug table, it has all of the LEAs with all of their students based on whatever that category set is, right? Like category set A is race, sex, disability code.
Right.
So if you pull category set A, that table at the LEA level, you get all of the LEAs based and all of the students with those 3 pieces of data.
Yeah. And we use
And then you
those
can
all the
further
time.
qualify it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I
Um,
just wasn't sure because some of the partners in my organization, they might use the UI, but they don't have access to SQL or they don't know how to use it. So
right. That's interesting. We may be able to add. That's something I'm going to write up a feature. And Madison, if you don't mind, I may reach out to you just to sort of like when I write up the proposal for the feature, just to make sure this is meeting what you're describing. But I think like we might be able to add some like additional context to that export feature that actually says, export by, LEA number or something like that, or some way to qualify it, because we could query the debug tables and go across, like we'd have to query multiple debug tables. That's the trick, right? Because the way they're currently created, you'd have to get
right.
data from all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, get a unique set of students, because you'd have to get, like, if you wanted one LEA and you wanted all the students across all the category sets, it would have to query all, like for child count, have to query all 13 tables.
Right.
Where district equals this number, and then compile all that together and present it. That's what we currently don't have. That's an interesting idea. I'm going to write something up, and like I said, I may reach out to you just to make sure that like I'm capturing the requirement correctly, and then we can look at it internally and see like if there's a way we can meet that requirement.
Right.
Thank you. That I hadn't even thought of that level of sort of aggregation of the data. So yeah.
Yeah.